Hello, everyone. We're here today to talk about environmental justice. My name is Allison Acevedo, and I'm the director of the Office of Environmental Justice at the Department of Environmental Protection. Here's the outline for the presentation. We're going to talk about federal and state environmental justice definitions, policies, and statutes to get grounding around what environmental justice is, discuss the why, the history, and roots around environmental justice and the science of disproportionate impacts, and then also learn about environmental justice in Pennsylvania and talk about public engagement, which is the core of environmental justice. The definition of environmental justice has been framed in different ways. So at the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the core of environmental justice is the notion of fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, in really a process in the development and implementation and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. PADEP does not have a formal definition of environmental justice in our policy, but has outlined in the working group report from 2001 an explanation of environmental justice that focus on the principle that communities and populations should not be disproportionately exposed to adverse environmental impacts. And the 17 principles of environmental justice established in the 1991 First People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit are also some key definitions around environmental justice. And the boxes at the bottom of the page represent elements of a taxonomy of environmental justice formulated by scholars and practitioners in the field. So there is a clear relationship between environmental justice and civil rights. The civil rights movement and the environmental movement of the 60s and 70s led to increasing awareness of injustices in systems and ability to act and change them. The environmental justice and Title VI are both rooted in the same principle that nobody, no one person, people should bear an unfair share of harm on account of race, color, national or national origin. So Title VI at its core requires recipients of federal funding to ensure all of their programs operate in a non-discriminatory manner. So it's really related to Title VI is related to a central component of environmental justice that programs benefiting a community as a whole cannot disproportionately allocate adverse environmental and health burdens. So that concept flows directly from Title VI. Just wanted to really quickly highlight the timeline of environmental justice, both at the federal and state level. So the 1960 civil rights movement was a informal beginning of the environmental justice movement. The formal term environmental justice was first used in 1982 as it referenced the Warren County, North Carolina PCB protest, and was a protest that was outlined on a federal level. And in the red, you can see the Pennsylvania state response to environmental justice. Our state in 1990s, beginning with Chester Community Advocacy, the formation of the office in 2002, previously called the Office of Environmental Advocate, listening sessions in the past few years. And both the federal and state, the most recent thing on this timeline is the 2021 executive order. There was a 1994 executive order, a 2021 executive order that focuses on climate and environmental justice that really gets to some critical pieces around environmental justice. The Justice 40 initiative that talks about 40% of federal benefits going to environmental justice communities, discussing an interagency environmental justice group, White House Environmental Council, and other key components, a geospatial tool around environmental justice, all laid out in the new executive order from President Biden. The terms and concepts of equality, equity, and justice are really critical to the foundation of environmental justice. So, so equality is really focusing on giving people the same thing, regardless of needs. Equity gives different people different resources depending on what they need to achieve the particular goal. In this case, it's seeing the game, and it's really important and critical due to long-standing historical inequities that are still affecting people and communities today. So the justice really gets to addressing the systems of oppression and systems of of inequality, and justice really moves to dismantling the systems of oppression and repairing some of the social inequities. So that's really a key component of environmental justice, getting to the cause and the root of inequity, and focusing on that concept of justice. Again, the historical roots of environmental justice, really talking about the um, critical key points around environmental justice, the Warren County, North Carolina incident, which attempted to create a landfill in a predominantly African American community in North Carolina. So again, environmental racism was coined during this protest and was a big catalyst for the environmental justice movement. And the 17 principles of environmental justice, as we mentioned with the definition, were first adopted in 1991, critical research with the United Church of Christ study in 1987, and the first executive order around environmental justice in 1994, signed by President Clinton. And a key portion of that executive order mandated that each federal agency made achieving environmental justice a key part of its mission by identifying any appropriate, disproportionately high and adverse human health or environmental impacts of its programs, policies, and activities on populations of color and low income populations. So all agencies were also required to incorporate environmental justice into their mission. So under that first executive order. In Pennsylvania, there are roots of environmental justice that travel straight to our office. The organizing of Chester, the community of Chester in 1990s was critical to the creation of the Environmental Justice Office in Pennsylvania. There was an environmental risk study done by EPA, DER in 1993, and subsequently the Chester Residents Concern for Quality Living, or Circle, filed a lawsuit against the EP in 1996. And really, the root of the action in Chester was relating to the fact that Chester had 8% of the county population in Delaware County, where it's situated, but 60% of the waste facilities in the county were located in Chester. And Chester Circle, the Chester Residents Concern for Quality Living, filed the lawsuit in 1996 under Title VI, claiming discriminatory effect as Chester was 70% African American. The lawsuit was eventually rendered moot when DEP denied the permit while the case was still on appeal. But as a result, DEP created the Environmental Justice Work Group in 1999, which released reports and recommendations in 2001, framing the Office of Environmental Justice and state work around environmental justice in Pennsylvania. So it was really a clear nexus between the work in Chester and the creation of the report, and subsequently the creation of the Office of Environmental Advocate, the predecessor to the Office of Environmental Justice in 2002. The Environmental Justice Advisory Board was created in 2000, established in 2004. And then our office, the Office of Environmental Justice, was renamed Office of Environmental Justice in 2015. Want to focus a bit upon the DEP mission. So the Department of Environmental Protection has a mission that is high level and really focuses on protecting Pennsylvania's air, land, and water from pollution and providing for health and safety of citizens through a cleaner environment. So we pledge also that our agency will work as partners with individuals, businesses, governments, and organizations to prevent pollution and restore our natural resources. So really at its core, a concern about protecting the environment. Our goals in the Office of Environmental Justice, which stemmed from evaluation as a result of the working group report, are minimizing adverse environmental impacts to ensure that communities are not unjustly or disproportionately burdened with our adverse environmental impacts, empowering communities and really supporting community empowerment, because the true empowerment happens at the community level by communities, but we help to ensure citizens have a meaningful involvement and voice in the decision making process, and then fostering economic opportunities which enable helping to enable environmentally responsible economic development, so supporting economic development. Now just wanted to talk more about the science of disproportionate impact, because that's again a core of the Office of Environmental Justice goals, and really thinking about what that means. So there are three drivers: the built environment, natural environment, and social environment. And they come together, these three drivers come together as a force multiplier to increase effects on the community. So communities face multiple vulnerabilities, not just traditional environmental vulnerability. So things like the built environment, which includes proximity to roads, the natural environment, which addresses things like flooding and actually COVID, heat waves, wildfire, and then the social environment, access to quality food, quality education, and other disparities. And there is um, empirical scientific evidence and evidence that really shows this disproportionate impact. So just want to clarify that there's information and literature that exists that it really demonstrates the concept of disproportionate impact by focusing on issues like physical infrastructure, health impacts, social vulnerability, climate and natural disasters, and examining a number of media: air, water, land, waste, toxics, and workers. And just wanted to highlight a couple of key empirical studies that demonstrate this disproportionate impact uh, based on race and income often. So the United Church of Christ study, separate and unequal residential segregation and cancer risk, understanding the cumulative impacts of inequalities in environmental health, implications for policy, and American Journal of Public Health supplement on environmental justice and disparities in environmental health, and showing clear correlations between environmental health situations and the and other environmental conditions, and a number of key studies. Just wanted to focus a bit on the concept and practice of redlining, and the redlining in general is a historical injustice that focused and started in the early around the New Deal, that really addressed uh, housing in our country, but then had the result of creating segregated housing segregated by race and ethnicity, as well as income, and then also um, perpetuating racist practices in federal government policy, and then subsequently continues the impacts of redlining continue today. So there's still historical legacies and historical challenges that um, that are still present as a result of redlining. So just wanted to really focus on which is redlining started as a housing practice and administered through the Federal Housing Administration, but wanted to show you that again, it started in the New Deal to increase home ownership, but the policies in the program mandated segregation. So just wanted to show you broadly from California, and then some examples of redlining in Pennsylvania that showed how the practices, which demonstrated systemic racist practices, really got to still uh, demonstrating and perpetuating environmental justice. So this redlining underwriting manuals, which we have access to, show the surveyor descriptions verbatim of redlined areas during the 1930s. So some of the areas talk about, so the areas are ranked from best to hazardous, and talk about how certain areas that are marked in red as hazardous are places where that environmental conditions and environmental hazards are grouped, and environmental hazards exist, and people of color are subject to often hazardous, those red line conditions. So just some verbatim descriptions from the Oakland, California red line map: odors and noises from local industries, infiltration of colored and orientals, and predominance of cheap older cheap cottages was one description of a redlined area in California. And also talking about adjoining industrial area with attendant odors and smoke. So the red line areas were labeled as red or hazardous, and often unable to obtain funding, which led to lower home values, and exist these conditions and home values and neighborhood devaluation exist today. So these descriptions expressly relate to race and income. Just wanted to show you some of the redlining maps from PA. So um, the first map is Wilkes-Barre, I believe. So the map really talks about the historical injustice that was demonstrated in the 30s, but again, still impacting communities in Pennsylvania today. And I'll just go through the different maps and go through the areas. This is the city of York. Again, it said that Negroes, foreigners, low class whites were living in very poor residential section. This is Johnstown. Again, these are surveyor descriptions talking about red line areas being adjoining to industrial areas with attendant odors and smoke. Altoona in Pennsylvania. So all of these areas across Pennsylvania are seeing that there are uh, red line and hazardous areas that often are designated by race. Pittsburgh: odors and noises from local industries, infiltration of colored and orientals, predominance of older cheap cottages. And Newcastle and Erie. And this is, again, redlining being a historical practice that demonstrates the existence of environmental injustice relating to today's environmental conditions. So both the Philadelphia and York maps that you see here show considerable intersections of red line areas with locations that now face potential environmental justice concerns. So practice from the 30s moving to address and demonstrate environmental justice concerns today. So in Philadelphia, 300 of 631, which is 48% of the block groups that meet the 98th percentile or higher for diesel particulate matter, overlap with red line areas. And then in York, block groups, 82% or 18 of 22 block groups that meet the 90th percentile for hazardous waste facilities overlap with red line areas. So showing the presence of both of these environmental conditions overlap with red line areas, again, established in the 30s, showing current environmental justice situations and environmental harms currently in PA. So just want to talk about now quantifying and some tools that help to explain and map disproportionate impacts. So there are disproportionate impacts, as we talked a little bit about earlier in the definition of, of environmental justice. Disproportionate impacts is a consistent pattern of combination of greater pollution burden and population vulnerability affecting the same communities, but primarily minority, low income, and indigenous populations, as demonstrated by ample evidence. So, really, just this showing a correlation between impacts, these environmental conditions with certain populations. So, the pollution burden and population characteristics are evaluated to demonstrate disproportionate impact. So consider exposures, environmental effects, sensitive population, as well as socioeconomic factors. Cal EnviroScreen is a tool used to demonstrate um, some environmental impacts, and it combines pollution burden and population characteristics to rank communities. It combines and aggregates factors to develop a vulnerability score, which, as you can see below, is a multiplier, which multiplies pollution burden and population characteristics. So pollution burden consists of average exposures and environmental effects multiplied by average of sensitive populations and socioeconomic factors. So that is the Cal EnviroScreen score. And Cal EnviroScreen is an interactive map and has been used to demonstrate these environmental conditions, but then also is utilized to allocate resources to communities based on the data shown with the Cal EnviroScreens score. EJ Screen is an EPA, Environmental Protection Agency tool. Similarly, it looks at environmental indicators and demographic indicators, although not providing a multiplier, provides a report that ranks that demonstrates these indicators. And you can get a report showing indicators for a particular area as shown by EJ Screen, both the environmental and demographic indicators. And then other states are using these mapping efforts, which really use cumulative impact methodologies to show impacts of environmental and health conditions on communities based on certain demographic information and demographic indicators. Some states are Washington, California, Illinois, Maryland, and then locally, some cities are considering these. And then, like I said, in California, they've used this mapping technology and this mapping information to provide resources to communities. So based on data showing cumulative impacts, these with this mapping data, California legislature, California policymakers, California stakeholders have been able to drive resources, change program terms to support priority populations as identified by that mapping data. In Pennsylvania, so want to talk about Pennsylvania in particular, kind of what resources and what policies we have around environmental justice. So in Pennsylvania, in particular, we have an environmental justice public participation policy. As you saw on some of the previous slides in the timeline, our policy was established in 2004. I want to clarify that we have an environmental justice policy In Pennsylvania, there is not an environmental justice law. The policy sits within DEP and was created by DEP. No environmental justice law or regulations at this point, which would require moving through a legislative process. So our policy now focuses on public participation, and it applies to permits identified as trigger permits, which demonstrate permits that either pose an environmental or health potential environmental or health hazards. And then there are opt-in permits, which the community believes should be permits subject to the policy based upon particular concerns in the community. And the trigger permits and opt-in permits are designated by group and category within environmental justice policy. And our policy ensures that in environmental justice areas and areas of concern, our office is able to provide additional support to environmental justice areas, and as well as those areas of concern that are around environmental justice areas. So we provide enhanced public participation to support communities that have permits applied within their area or within their community. And we often provide communities with the opportunity to learn more about a permit or a particular project in their area, and to have increased engagement with DEP around that particular permit and application for permit. So one of the things that this policy started in 2004 focuses on public participation, and we want to think about how we can expand the policy given the parameters of the fact that there's no environmental justice law, expanding the policy to think about other areas where environmental justice maybe include environmental justice in a policy, such as grant making, such as designating and delineating an environmental justice interagency council, ensuring environmental justice training, maybe designating other tools for environmental justice. So right now, as you can see as an example on this slide, the environmental justice policy, you could see that we've designated again areas as EJ areas that are 30% people of color and or 20% low income. About 30% of the population is in EJ areas, which are designated by census tract. And as you can see from this map, EJ areas are also rural and urban. Again, EJ areas are rural and urban. And we have an environmental justice areas viewer, which is a tool for seeing particular permitted, to see whether or not first an area is in an environmental justice area. So you can search by address to see if there is a particular address within whether a particular address sits within an environmental justice area, and then also look at the environmental justice map to see certain permits that were within a particular area. So we have the EJ viewer. We have other tools in our office, like our annual report, which we will soon be releasing an annual report for 2019. We also have an information sheet, and we are working and thinking about expanding the mapping and working with other agencies to discuss a mapping tool that gets to thinking about some of the issues around environmental health and environmental justice and the demographic information. I just wanted to touch a bit upon public participation because that was the root of our policy, but I'm sure many of you have seen this slide and want to emphasize that our office is thinking about how to better focus on public participation so that we promote both transparency and involvement in some level of decision making process for communities. So we are able to engage with public participation around a permit, but then also with communities as we're developing and moving forward to implement certain initiatives. So really thinking about how to involve community partners in decision making processes. And again, these are things that many of you know, just thinking about obstacles to meaningful processes, really based upon building relationships from both the community and our agency, and then the benefits of community engagement, which hopefully will be expressed and discussed here during the EJMPA conference, but really thinking about building local knowledge and really building a network of local knowledge that focuses on experience and incorporates history of a locality or a region. And we want to minimize on our end delays in the permitting process and the regulatory process by ensuring that we have relationships that don't need to be rebuilt or started to be built even in a particular situation with a particular permit, but that the relationships are ongoing and really want to develop relationships with core partners. And then just wanted to give our contact information. John Breakall, Justin Dula, and I are all in the Office of Environmental Justice. Our contact information is here. We also ask you to sign up for EJ News, our newsletter. The information is on our website, but you can also email us if you're interested. It's on our all of our uh, signature lines to be able to sign up for uh, the EJ newsletter. So I encourage you all to do that. And then please, if there are any questions, reach out to us and please feel free to ask questions about any of this. And we hope that you're engaged. The EJMPA symposium and event is one that builds networks and solidifies old relationships and begins new ones. So just hopefully this was helpful to get some framing around environmental justice in PA.